Welcome back to TK Tennis. So today's video is, can Joao Fonseca become a Grand Slam champion? And can he become the #1 player in the world? So I'm going to call him Joe Fonseca because I've heard Dimitrov and other players just call him Joe for short. I'm not sure how to pronounce Joao properly. So Joe Fonseca, he's the rising up-and-coming star from Brazil that has a lot of hype, and the Brazilian fans are really psyched about him. So in the last video, I talked about who can challenge Sinner and Alcaraz, and most people, or a lot of people, or a lot of pundits believe that it could be Joe Fonseca. So let's talk about it and see if he can challenge Sinner and Alcaraz and be possibly the third wheel and have another big three in the future. So let's jump into it and first talk about Joe Fonseca is 18 years old at the time of this video, but he's going to be turning 19 years old in just a couple weeks. So he'll be 19 years old soon, and he's obviously has tremendous talent. So when you're judging players and young up-and-coming stars that have a lot of hype, you have to ask yourself, how do you know if someone like that is going to become a Grand Slam champion, or whether they can become an elite player, a top 3 player on the tour today, and compete against guys like Sinner and Alcaraz? And if you want to know the future, all you have to do is know your history, right? And just a quick background in history. I've been watching the most elite players play tennis, not only on TV, but in person, since 1990. Actually, since 1986, when I think I watched Lendl win the US Open. I think it was 86 when Lendl won the US Open, and I was there for that. But I really started paying attention in around 1990. When it was Sampras. And I remember watching the day before the US Open started, I was watching this young guy named Sampras who only won a 250 tournament in Philadelphia, and hardly anyone knew who Sampras was. And as I was watching him on the grandstand court at the US Open, playing against, I think it was the previous winner and a Grand Slam champion, Mats Wilander. And he was playing Mats Wilander in a practice set the day before the US Open. And he crushed Wilander 6-1 in the practice set. And I said to my former high school coach, just happened to be there, and I was sitting next to him, I said, how can this guy not win? This guy's going to win the US Open. And I had no idea who he was. But you could just see that this guy, Sampras, had something different. And he was 19 years old when he did that, won the 250 event, and then he went on to win the US Open. So since then, we've had people like Agassi, Sampras in that generation. And then, of course, we went into the generation of the big three with Novak, Carlos, and Jannik. And if you know your history, and I've watched all these guys, and let's talk about Federer. Let's talk about the late bloomers. So all of these players that I'm just mentioning, all the best elite players, the multi-time Grand Slam champions or the most elite players, have won or made Grand Slam quarterfinals or beyond, semifinals or won Grand Slams before they were 20 years old. Grand Slam quarterfinals and beyond before they're 20 years old. So they were all 18 and 19 and at least making it to the quarterfinals. And the two that are most interesting are Federer and Sinner. They were the two late bloomers in that group I just mentioned, where they made their first quarterfinals at the ages of 19 and 20, and then they won their first Grand Slams when they were 21, and I think in the case of Sinner was 22. So they're the late bloomers in this, in that history, but they still made it to the quarterfinals when they were a teenager and beyond in their Grand Slams, or in several Grand Slams, I should say. So if you know your history, that if you're going to become totally elite, you're probably going to do it when you're 18 years old and 19 years old. So Joe is turning 19 soon, and he's never made it past the third round, so 2 rounds before the quarterfinals. So he's never made it past the quarterfinals or the third round in a Grand Slam yet. So that's not boding well for him to be a elite, long-term elite player if you believe in history. So we'll talk about his game in a minute as well. But that's something to pay attention to as he turns 19, and this year and next year are going to be really important. And we're going to have very clear signals whether he can be a multi-time Grand Slam champion or compete against Sinner and Alcaraz in the future, like so many people believe that he can. And I'll give you my opinion and prediction on that as well. So now that you know the history, that the best of the best have all been teenagers, you have to really compare them to that, because you can win a Grand Slam, your first Grand Slam, in your 20s or even late 20s, but it's very, very rare. And if you're going to be elite, it has to come early in your career, and you see clear signs of it. So let's talk about first his physical attributes. And when I talk about the men's game on the ATP Tour, I've talked about this a lot. The things that you must have in order to be totally elite and dominate your sport is you have to have freakish agility and speed. Speed and agility are the number one things on the ATP Tour. It's not about stroke making. It's about your physical attributes. And do you have the speed and the agility, not just the agility in your physical ability to contort yourselves, but also is your game agile? So you can take someone like Roger and look at his game. And his game, Federer's game, was very agile, even though physically he wasn't maybe the most agile. He was very agile, but his game with his one-hander and his forehand was very flexible and very agile. Now you take someone like Sinner, who his agility is both in his game and his physical agility, coming from skiing and so forth. He's just very, very agile. And then you can look at someone like Nadal, who was always muscular, even as a kid. He was sort of that muscular kid, but he was also very, very agile for his body type. And you could see that the way he could get in and out of corners and hit on the run backhands and forehands. He was exceptionally agile, even though he was a little bit bigger framed. And all these guys had incredible speed. Federer, maybe of those three, of Novak and Nadal, may have been the least fast, let's say that. But he was still exceptionally fast. But because he's a little taller and he's using a one-handed backhand, he was able to cover the court incredibly well at an elite level, right? So it's different levels of speed and agility. So let's compare that to someone like Joe or Joao and look at first of his body agility. His body agility, he's an agile guy. He can get in, slide into the corners with his backhand. He's certainly agile, but is he elite agility? I don't see it, at least not yet. I don't see elite. I see better than average agility, but I don't see it being elite. And how about speed as well? When you compare him to people like Novak in the past, and certainly like Carlos today, does he have the elite level speed that Carlos has? Well, Carlos is like, or Demon Hour, for instance. He doesn't have that level of speed. So it's certainly above average for the tour, but is it elite in terms of what Carlos brings to the table? Or even Sinner, his speed is also elite. It's a little bit different type of speed because he has big steps and a big reach, but he's also incredibly quick around the court. And when I look at Joe Fonseca, I don't see that quite that level of speed. So when it comes to speed and agility, I don't see the absolute elite level speed and agility. And right there, that sends out warning signals to me in terms of, can he be truly the number one player in the world and win Grand Slam championships, I should say. So that's my thoughts on there. Now let's turn our focus a little bit to his mental acuity. Does he truly want to be a champion? And does he have what it takes? And that's another thing that you see at a very young age with these players, especially someone like Novak and Nadal. Their aptitude for wanting to be incredibly great was seen at 16 years old, at 17 years old. Their fire and the competitiveness that they brought to the table was absolutely worldly or otherworldly. And when it comes to Joe Fonseca, do I see that? I'm not saying he's not competitive. He has a very high level of competitiveness, but is it elite? No, I think it's above average. I don't think it's quite elite. So again, I'm not seeing this sort of elite level of physical attributes. Now let's turn our attention to his game and specifically his stroke mechanics. Now we can all say that his forehand is elite, at least his setup forehand. His running forehand, is it elite? I'm not so sure it's elite. It's better than average. Everything about his forehand is well above average. He has an incredible forehand, but he has an incredible setup forehand. So when he's set up to hit a shot, He has as good a forehand as pretty much anyone. But his running forehand, maybe not as much. His backhand, better than average, possibly, but not elite. How about his serve? Moving to his serve. He's not an incredibly tall guy. He's not short by any means. Oh, and a quick interruption. If anyone's interested in what racket this is, of course, this is a Yonex E-Zone. I'm stringing it at 52 pounds with Toro line Toro. This is one of my favorite strings. I haven't used it in a while. This is not for me. This is for a customer. But Toro, I really, out of all the Toro line strings, this is probably my favorite string that I've tried from Toro, and I've tried all of them except for Toro Tour. So this is a wonderful string. I think it's a great string for recreational players and for most levels of all recreational levels up to advanced players. Maybe not the most high caliber players will probably want something a little bit stiffer, but this has a little bit of a softer feel and a little extra pop compared to a lot of strings or a lot of polys. So that's what I'm doing here. But turning our attention back to Joe Fonseca and his game, talking about his serve. Now, serves are the one area of a game that really can improve between when you're 18 and 22. Because when it comes to your game, you're not at peak man speed and man strength and man fitness level until you're about 22, 23. You've seen that with Sinner. You see that with every player. So there's some room to improve on Joe's serve, of course. His serve needs to get better because his serve is certainly not elite. And that will get better with time. And the important thing to note, how about his other physical attributes in terms of his body? You know, he still has that young body. It's still not a man body, so he still has time to improve, and he's certainly going to need to, because again, I know he's only 18 turning 19, but his fitness and his strength are going to need to improve, and it certainly will as he gets older, 21, 22 years old. So it'll be interesting to see how his physical body changes, but I think he certainly needs to get leaner. His diet's going to need to be strict, and his training regimen is going to need to be world class, because as right now he still has that kid body, and that's what you'd expect, of course. So he doesn't have a man body yet. We'll see how that transpires. So overall in his game other than his forehand is not yet elite, and he'll need to improve many aspects of his game, just like any 18 or 19-year-old will need to. So then that brings back to what's his background. Now, Fonseca comes from Brazil, from a very wealthy family. So he comes from a family of privilege. And the interesting thing about privilege is that when you're young, when you're working on your sport, your craft, it's an advantage, right? You have access to tennis courts and court time and instructors and all those sorts of things. So when you're young, it's a big advantage to come from privilege. But when you're on the tour as a pro and as an adult, the question is it ever an advantage to come from affluence and come from privilege? And the answer to that is generally no. It's never an advantage. It's not necessarily a disadvantage, but it's never really an advantage, because typically the best champions, most of them have not come from privilege. So sometimes coming from privilege is a detriment, and it's not helpful, because you always have something to fall back on. You don't have to do this for a career. He comes from privilege. Now, there are many privileged players that have done incredibly well. There are two on the tour right now, on the WTA tour, with Jessica Pegula and, of course, Emma Navarro. And they are the best versions of themselves for tennis players, and they come from enormous privilege. And so they have utilized their privilege to maximize becoming the best tennis player for themselves. And Emma Navarro in particular, she seems to have been raised in, while it came from privilege, she certainly seemed to be raised with a lot of perspective and understanding how hard she needs to work if she wants to become the best version of herself. So when it comes to Joe Fonseca, coming from privilege more often than not is a detriment when you get to the tour level, but it certainly helps you get to the tour level. So that's something that he's going to have to contend with. And when it comes to competitive spirit, as he gets older, how does he adapt to tour life? Does he really embrace being on the tour? Is he one of those people? Because most people can't. do what the Federers have done and the Novaks have done and Sinner and Carlos, and really embrace this travel lifestyle that revolves around tennis all the time, and eating well and stretching and waiting for your matches and the hardships that come with tour life. And for those people who think it's not hardship, it is. It's a different kind of hardship. Living the tour life and traveling and always on the practice courts and always training, and everything revolves around tennis and always waiting for your matches. You go, because matches rarely have specific start times. You go on a court when the court becomes open and when the previous match is over. So you always have to be ready for those types of things. So we'll have to see how he adapts to that tour life. So those are my thoughts on Joe. So now let's answer the question. Do I think Joao Fonseca can win a Grand Slam? I do think he can win some Grand Slams. It's going to be hard with Sinner and Alcaraz there. But I think he will get to that level, the top 5 level, where he puts himself in positions to possibly win some Grand Slams. But it's not going to be easy, and it's certainly not, I wouldn't even say necessarily likely. I would say 50 to 60% likely that he wins some Grand Slams. The question is, will he become the number 1 player in the world? That one I can answer pretty confidently. I don't think so. I don't think he'll ever become number 1 in the world as long as Sinner and Alcaraz are playing at the level they are today. I can't see him breaking through and competing against those guys as the number 1 players, unless a lot changes with his physical attributes between turning 19 and over the next few years when he becomes 22. Can he become a regular top 10 player? For certain. He can be a top 10 player and a perennial top 10 player and possibly a top 5 player. But I don't know if I see him being the 3 or 4 guy for long periods of time, but he could be. He certainly could get there. I just don't see him being at the peak level. So the hype is somewhat real, but it's not the type of hype that I've seen with history. So when I look back at history and I compare him to all the current champions and all the past champions from 1990 to now, do I see the same qualities in Joe Fonseca that I saw in all those other guys? And the answer is no, not quite. So I think he's not going to be a bust. He's going to be a tremendous tennis player. But I think for you Brazilian fans, and we're going to probably get flamed in the comments, I don't think he's going to quite reach the level that you hope he's going to reach. So anyway, that's my thoughts on Joe Fonseca. If you want to know, or any deep dives as I'm stringing about any other players, let me know in the comments. Hopefully they're players that people find interesting to talk about, and I can do that. But that's my thoughts on Joe Fonseca. Number 1 in the world. I think that's doubtful. Grand Slam champion, possibly, maybe even a little bit likely, but not a certainty by any means, not to the level that a lot of people think he's going to. I apologize to those Brazilian fans who may think otherwise, and I respect your opinions, but this is my unbiased opinion, or my opinion based on 35 years of watching professional tennis players come up from juniors and turn into elite level players. And history is your biggest guide. If you pay attention to the history, you can kind of see who's likely to be an elite player and who's less likely to do so. So thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe and comment in the comments if you like these videos, and I will see you in the next days.